Good morning to everybody and welcome to the first plenary panel session. I'm excited to be your moderator for this panel because fortunately we have been able to join a group of high-level experts in LATAM on electricity markets. As you may know, the topic of this plenary will be the electrical markets and regulatory challenges for smart grid growth in Latin America. I'm really pleased to be on the panel with Jose Prada. Jose Prada is a Colombian national and is the expert commissioner of the Colombian Energy Regulatory Agency, the CREG. Jose is a senior energy specialist with experience in regulation, management, and operation of energy markets. He has quite a long experience and outstanding positions in the region. After Jose, coming mostly from the private sector, Fabiola Sena from Brazil will share her long experience as an expert on energy markets in Latin America. Fabiola is not only knowledgeable about the Brazilian market, but most electricity markets in the region. At the end, Fabiola will be followed by Dr. Jaime Mendoza. Jaime Mendoza is Peruvian, is the chairman of the OCINERMIN, a close friend of mine. I know Jaime for quite a long time. I forgot to tell you that I'm also Peruvian. I'm really grateful to have these high-level speakers this morning. Okay, just getting more in the matters that have make us together today. Obviously, the international economy is undergoing very important transformations, especially due to technological progress. One of areas of progress is, of course, the IT revolution and Internet of Things and digitalization, and basically digitalization economy-wide, across industries, countrywide. With global reach. And of course, digitalization allows to improve performance, monitoring, increase reliability, and obviously the introduction of digitalization on energy networks will be very important down the lines. But the energy sector is also undergoing a global revolution, specifically related with the current push of renewables that have been getting really cost advantages and efficiencies that have provided the energy markets with new solutions, also with new problems, of course, but most of the new solutions are focused on higher efficiency on the energy markets because of the cost of these renewable energies. Some of the risks, of course, come with the variability of the energy due to variability of, sun or winds, of course, and require and need to design backup balancing systems or batteries or devices in order to countervail this variability, of course, with a focus on improve the reliability of our electricity markets, where the grids are a key component. However, we have also seen the rise of distributed generation, right? That also has somehow shifted the balance of power in the energy markets, not just to the producer or a one-way relation, but mostly on a bi-directional relationship, when we could see down the road that consumers will be mostly known probably in the future as prosumers, where will be not only consumers, but also with distributed generation, will be producers of energy as well. So that imposed high challenges for the network. And the objectives, of course, is to decrease cost, increase economic efficiency, and reliability. Everything of that sounds nice, sounds interesting, sounds challenging, right? But the issues that we want to learn from our panel is how every country is prepared in order to cope with these technological changes. Probably in the first panel, which will be run for 30 minutes, each speaker will have 10 minutes, we will try to get some insights on what's the state of the art of smart grids on each of the countries where panel members are specialists. So each speaker will have 10 minutes, and we will rejoin later for a second panel. And I will ask Jose to start with Colombian experience and sharing your professional experience as well with the current state of the art of smart grids in Latin America. Jose, you have the floor.
Thank you, Gonzalo. Hello, everybody. Good morning. First, I want to thank you, the organizers. Thank you for having me. Okay, so we've been invited to talk about the smart grids in Colombia. And first, okay, I work with the energy regulator, as Gonzalo explained, in Colombia, but I'm going to talk not just from the regulation point of view. I'm just gonna share with you my opinion, my perspective on development of smart grids in Colombia, in our electricity market, as someone that works here with first-hand experience and has some insights that I can share with you. So smart grids is like a catch-all word, right? It's difficult to first try to define and focus on what's exactly what we refer to when we're talking about the smart grid. So when we talk about the smart grids in Colombia, we understand many different things, and it's probably not very different the situation in other countries. So we talk about distributed energy resources, and that could be distributed generation. Distributed generation, according to our definition, is generation connected to the distribution networks, low voltage levels, just to produce and deliver energy. We also talk about prosumers, producer and consumers, users that can also produce energy for their own consumption, and also eventually to sell energy if they have excess generation. We don't really talk about prosumers, we talk about self-generation. That's our local term. We talk about self-generators, that are users that can self-generate part of their own energy needs, and in some periods they produce more that they can consume, and they can inject that energy to the network and hopefully sell that energy. Then we also talk about energy storage systems around the different networks. That's one let's say one aspect of the smart grids. Another one is demand response, also like a big term encompassing different aspects. So in demand response, we talk about the active participation of demand in the energy market that is possible, of making that possible. We talk about incentive programs where we can pay demand for their flexibility, for their ability to reduce consumption in some periods where that's useful for the operation of the system. So that's what we call demand response programs. And we also talk about not programs that are not related to direct payments, but mainly based on economic incentives, like based on real-time rates. So we also include that among the smart grid programs in our market. So designing rate structures that gives incentive for an efficient consumption of energy. That could be rates based on time of use or real pricing, if that's possible, or the way that can be possible. It's a difference we like to make about direct payment programs and incentives through rate structures. Of course, electric mobility, digitalization, use of fax, use of smart devices. But I want to stress a special one, which is AMI, Advanced Metering Infrastructure, of smart metering, the way you want to call it. And I think that's a key enabler technology for all the rest. Like for any kind of smart grid programs, we think we need AMI, and we need deployment and rollover of the smart meters in our system. And so that's a especially important program in the country that we're trying to advance right now, about the deployment of intelligent metering in the country. Okay, so that's like the things we're working on now. What's the state? Let's see, we have a legal framework. We have laws that gives incentives, mainly investment, tax incentives, to invest in smart grid programs. Not directly smart grid programs, mostly focused on renewable energies and efficiency programs, but those are in close relationship. So most of the smart grid programs has a renewable energy side, so they are able to apply and get all of these incentives. So we have a legal framework, a series of incentives, and the investments in smart grids are making use of these incentives. That from the point of view of the, let's say, the legal framework, we have an energy policy from the government that promotes renewable energy, promotes modernization of the electricity grid, promotes development of the electricity market, and that it's very related to implementing smart grids in the country. And related to that is from the regulation side, with developing the technical and commercial regulation related to these smart grid programs. We started like, let's say, 4 years ago with the technical requirements for connections, what they need to comply in terms of operation of the system. So a series of technical and also the commercial side, how are they going to connect to the grid, how are they going to somehow sell services or get paid for the services they offer, or get remunerated depending on the specific program. And So I must say, I should say that we're in an initial stage. So we have a legal framework. We have identified smart grid programs, like all these different programs, different aspects I mentioned before. We have a legal framework with incentives for mainly for investments. We're developing the technical and economic regulation for connecting and operating different devices or enabling different technologies. We right now have a plan for deployment of smart meters in the system that maybe I can talk a little bit more later. And yeah, so we're starting to see in terms of deployment, we're starting to see a smart grid investment, smart grid projects penetration. It's low now. It's growing. In private agents are responding to the incentives, are very interested. And in the sense that regulation is being developed, it's seen as a facilitator or facilitating the smart grids development or the integration of these smart grid programs. So yeah, so that's pretty much what I can say was the current state of the smart grid development in our electricity market. And we have specific rules for different programs, and I may talk a little bit about that later, but I would also like to hear from my colleagues. So back to you, Gonzalo. You're mute, Gonzalo.
Thanks, Jose, and thanks for keeping exact track of time. It's really helpful, and I guess your view of the different components and the challenges that are related on a smart grid probably will give help to one of the issues that Fabiola could explain on detail a bit more. Fabiola, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Gonzalo. Well, first of all, I'd like to thank you for the opportunity of being a speaker in such a prestigious event. And as an enthusiast of tech, regulation, and the future of energy, I'll be very glad to share with you some views of what's going on in Brazil in the field of smart grids and modernization. Well, at least in Brazil, smart grid developments are a direct result of turning electricity consumers more and more active. Traditionally, the consumer's role in the electricity market used to be completely passive, only as an end user of this value chain. But now, here in Brazil, consumers are starting to have a more active participation, be able to generate, store, and also manage their demand. Well, this evolution of consumers' role, also known as prosumer or self-producer of energy, is possible because of technology advancements provided by communications and also the DERs, the distributed energy resources, such as distributed generation, demand response, and electric mobility. Well, this landscape will require that the distribution grid is prepared to receive these technologies. And this preparation is economic and technical. And we can fairly say that this is the major driver for distributors to invest in adapting their networks to operate in this more and more complex infrastructure. And in this context, the biggest driver of distribution modernization and smart grids developments in Brazil is the distributed generation. The country has currently nearly 180 gigawatts of installed capacity that comes from centralized traditional generation and 7 gigawatts of distributed generation. So 97% of this distributed generation in Brazil comes from solar. Well, in Brazil, the distributed generation for regulated consumers is available only through the net metering model. And having said that, there are some initiatives of smart grids in Brazil, but the major part of them can be categorized as pilot projects. So Brazil is also, as Colombia, in an initial phase of development. And most of these pilot projects are under the scope of R&D, research and development projects. So it's important to mention also that by Brazilian law, distribution companies must invest 1% of their net operating revenues in R&D. So part of this money goes to this type of smart grid projects. Well, but distribution companies are also preparing and investing in other fields of modernization, preparing for being this, distributor of the future. And some examples of this type of investments are artificial intelligence for power network management, the automation of grid self-healing, the digitalization of electricity bills, the creation of digital platforms for the consumers can monitor the consume, and the installation of smart meters, and even the creation of what we call here the digital neighborhoods. There is an example in Vila Olímpia neighborhood in São Paulo City that is being developed by the Italian utility, and a very interesting project. So we can say that this pilot projects being converted into scale projects, so in a scale phase, will depend basically on regulation. And when it comes to regulation, we are talking about economic and also technical regulation. But I will save my words, this part of my speech, for the next round of questions when we call about the trends and also the adaptation that we need to have in current regulation here in Brazil. So thank you very much, Gonzalo.
Thanks, Fabiola, and thanks for saving some time for probably the final remarks and discussion that I hope will be fruitful. Please, Jaime, join us with the floor.
Thank you, Gonzalo. First of all, I want to thank the invitation to participate in this important event, as a panelist with distinguished experts of the region. Well, as introduction, I want to share with you this definition of a smart grid. Smart grid is an electricity grid that intelligently integrates the behavior and actions of all agents, generators, transmitters, distributors, operators, and consumers, in order to provide electricity in a sustainable, safe, and economical way. It implies various types of technology, both in the upstream and in the downstream segment. Smart grids also allow the integration of non-conventional renewable resources for power generation in the interconnected electrical system, which most important benefit is the reduction of CO2 emissions. Investment in smart grid solutions and technologies in Latin America have different levels of development. Some countries started their first pilots many years ago. Other countries have lower advances in smart grids investment and regulations. Our country is not the exception. And what are we doing about decentralization, decarbonization, and digitization? Well, Peru is responsible for 0.4% of CO2 emissions globally. At COP21 of 2015, the Peruvian government committed to reducing its CO2 emissions by 30% by 2030 under the Paris Agreement. And in December 2020, it increased this commitment to 40% in order to achieve carbon neutrality to 2050. The energy transportation sectors in Peru generate approximately 1/3 of the country's carbon emissions, and renewable energies can play an important role in mitigating this impact, contributing to the countries for environmental sustainability. Additionally, this deployment will generate millions of US dollars in investments and thousands of jobs in the country that are currently paralyzed by COVID-19, encouraging in that way the economic reactivation. Speaking about energy, our matrix is composed mainly of renewable energy, conventional and non-conventional, and natural gas. Here, the introduction of non-conventional renewable technologies has been implemented by regulation issued in 2008, which has mainly promoted through 4 auctions the entry of 400 megawatts wind and 280 megawatts solar plants, which have contributed to decarbonization. On the other hand, the DL 1221 issued in 2015 contemplates distributed generation as an activity to decentralize energy production in environments where the consumer will have a more active role. In addition, it promotes the incorporation of technological innovation and energy efficiency in electrical distribution system, and the entry of smart metering systems too. More details and the advance of these issues, including e-mobility, will be discussed in the next blocks. Thank
you. Thanks, Jaime. I guess at this time it's pretty clear for all of us that we are facing a highly complex issue because, as Jose was saying, smart grid is almost a catch-all phrase, and there are some key components along the power networks that are especially sensible. And trying to go into the second block of questions, I guess especially when we try to see, the generation, transmission, distribution, and the end consumer, what we have seen on the technological advance during the last years is, for example, the levelized cost of energy of renewables has dropped, right? So energy prices from efficiency levels are, beneficial for the generation, for the cost of overall generation, right? And we could get efficiency gains there. Besides the reliability problems, of course, that obviously will need some backup systems or market mechanisms in order to counter the variability. But obviously there is a gain there. It's a net gain, efficiency gain. The grids, the transmission networks are bi-directional. Usually they have a stamp rate. So somehow the expansion of the grid is always a problem. I think most of the countries have made improvements on how to deal with that. But the distribution part has been mostly unidirectional. And when we try to see how to transfer from the generation and the transmission to the consumer with the net metering or advanced monitoring and everything, demand response, we're putting pressure on the distribution companies, and probably we're putting pressure for investment there in order to improve the quality of this key component of all the value chain of the energy market. So if I'm correct, and I will please will want to see your views on that, the requirement for investment there probably will be higher. And if that's true, the next question will be, how are we going to charge, or how this new investment is going to be recouped? Who is going to pay for it? And that's an important part of the question. And also, I guess from our Latin American experience, we know that income disparities are high, consumption disparities are high, densities, of course, are high, abilities to pay are very different. So in certain areas, as Fabiola was saying, and most of Latin American countries show, high profitable small markets that could require first world type of technological advancements where you can just implement pilots. But our income disparities and the different ability to pay economy-wide put higher challenges, because we're talking about how to get the advantage of the technology, but on the other end of our income distribution, probably there are some people who will not have the ability to pay. So that also introduce deeper problems on the balance of regulation, incentive, economic signals. This issue is, of course, difficult, and probably there are some best practices around the world in order to manage that. So I would like to, call you back to the floor in order to discuss these issues and probably others that could be interested. Each one of you will have also 10 minutes, and we'll start with Jose again. Please, Jose.
Sure. Gonzalo, you just pointed out a very important problem, and which is central, I guess, to all the smart grid programs. And it's about that balance, that trade-off between the cost and the value we're getting for those investments. Because at the end, the user is going to pay for everything, but almost everything. And every investment in every new technology is going to show up somehow in the electricity rates at the end. And that's a sensitive issue in all our countries. So we have to make sure that all the investments are made in a cost-efficient manner, and that we're getting the benefits we expect from those investments. And those are not going to be the same for all the different segments of customers, so there are regional differences. So there's a series of problems and trade-offs that you're always dealing with for every kind of smart grid program of investment. And that's the reality. We have to deal with that. Sure. And regarding like specific programs, I want to maybe illustrate a little bit about that trade-off and how are we facing that challenge right now through regulation in Colombia. And we have a special structure in our market which makes it maybe a little bit more difficult than in other parts, because we have a separation between the retail function and the network operation function. So distributors are not the same retailers. I mean, their companies can have both functions, but there can be retailers supplying energy to customers on the networks of other companies. So we have to, when we're designing the rules, we have to take care of that and to see how to be very careful about how the relations are going to be with the users, the retailer, and the network operator in the system. This is part of the regulations we're developing in the country. As Fabiola mentioned, we need technical and commercial regulations. Technical regulations are not just needed because we need to ensure that they're going to connect to comply with the technical requirements of the system, but also it's important that they not create entry barriers for the system, which is not uncommon. That if we are over jealous or we create a lot of technical requirements that is going to go against the ability of new investors to enter into the markets. So we also, because depending on the scale, and this is something we have identified, you need different requirements depending on the scale. Maybe for utility scale programs, like very detailed technical requirements, but for small, what we call a small scale investments. And by the way, small scale for our system is under 1 megawatt, and everything over 1 megawatt is utility scale. So we need for small scale simplified requirements, make it easier, make it practical to connect all these energy resources, otherwise it's not going to work. So in terms of distributed generation, we have technical requirements according to the scale, simplifying some case. Also for self-producers, we make a distinction between utility scale and a small scale self-producer, and we have different rules. Like, for example, a large scale, utility scale distributed generation or self-producers go to the market pretty much with the same rules that other conventional generators, maybe not competing in the market, but they're somehow allowed to present their availability and program how they want to be dispatched the next day, but technical conditions are the same, and what they produce is paid in the market with the same rules that conventional generation. But for small scale producers, we allow them to inject into the network, and we pay the market price. We allow them to sign contracts with different retailers. And we also have a credit system, a net metering system, just for a smaller scale, not for utility scale, because we're very aware that they can be distortions, let's say, when you expand a net metering program. You can have under recovery of investments. Okay, so different problems. So we're tackling those problems one-to-one, technical, commercial. For example, for energy storage systems, the immediate need we have now in the system is for non-wired solutions. How we're going to use these systems to avoid investment in new distribution lines or transmission lines that are difficult to construct. Right now, licensing and construction permits are complicated. It's taking a long time. So you can deploy in 2 years battery system, and you can alleviate those problems in those parts of the network that have congestion and that you need to, in like peak hour demand, to increase the ability to move energy to that part of the network. So we developed first technical and commercial rules to install battery system in our grid, in our transmission and distribution networks, to alleviate transmission congestion for non-wire solutions. And that's, we are actually in the process of installing our first battery system in the grid, which is a 40 megawatt system at 34.5 kV. This is going to be our first energy storage system. And some other things we're going to do in the future is to develop ancillary services. So battery system maybe could enter into this market, but I mean, it's like we're tackling the problems one by one. So in this case, we created a solution for energy storage systems for that specific need. We devised the rules to pay for them and to make them connect to the system, operate under specific rules. Let's see, other things I would like to mention, like demand response. We're creating demand response programs. Right now we have a demand response program which is using demand as a reliability resource, as a backup resource. When generators fail in a specific condition, they can get backup from demand flexibility, and they get paid for that. But we're starting to devise new programs where demand is not just a reliability resource, it's an operation resource, maybe a security resource in case of a specific contingency in the system. But we're in the initial stages of this, always trying to make that balance between the benefit, the value we're getting, and how much we want to pay for that, because there's a cost associated. Let's see. Okay. I have any other some other examples, but just to finish, I would like to refer to smart metering plans. So as I said at the beginning, we think it's essential for smart grid programs. We need the smart metering for all other programs, so it's a key enabler. We have a plan now, and that's in line with the energy policy of the country, to implement and roll out programs to get 50 to 75% coverage of smart metering among the users of the system, like in a 3 to 5 years plan, which is based on a benefit cost analysis. We're going to make sure that is going to be deployed when the benefit is greater than the cost, which is not always easy. And we're going to centralize all the information we get for the smart metering system, and we're going to make it available to all the market. That's the plan. But to be honest, not everybody is in line with that. There are critics, people is concerned about cost, about safety issues, privacy issues. So getting public acceptance for smart metering programs and for other smart grid programs could be a challenge. And I'm going to stop here because maybe I exceeded my time. So thank you, Gonzalo.
No, Jose, it was very interesting, and thanks again for keeping track of all the time. You're sharp on time. I guess we can move on to Fabiola, and one of the participants, for example, request Fabiola if she could be able to explain the pilot project of the Italian distribution company. I don't know if you can share that.
Unfortunately, I can't, because it's a secret. It's keeping secret by the distribution company. So we only know the information, the commercial information. So they are still developing this project, but it's very interesting. It's from the neighborhood is called Vila Olímpia in São Paulo. So as soon as we have more information, of course, that we can share. I'm sorry. Okay, so should I talk about the trends, the regulatory trends in Brazil? Okay. Well, first of all, we see here in Brazil that the major driver for reaching what we call the future in smart grids is the regulation. And the big question mark is how to attract investments in the field of smart grid. The investments will come if there is a sustainable market design from both commercial and technical perspectives. And this, of course, depends on regulation. So I would like to explore here with you 4 areas that we see as key in Brazil for regulatory improvements that could speed up smart grids. The first area would be the unbundling, the separation between energy and wire tariffs for all consumers, including small, low voltage consumers as residentials. In Brazil, only large consumers from Group A, what we call Group A, connected in voltage higher than 2.3 kilovolts, have unbundled tariffs. So we see that this separation of wire and energy tariffs is essential to give the right economic signals of products and service sold to consumers. And well, even the current net metering system used here in Brazil for small consumers connected in distribution companies would also take benefit from this tariff improvement because we could bring the right economic signals in these initiatives. Number 2 could be the tariff modernization, especially introducing what we call the time of use tariff for energy. This basically means introducing different prices of electricity at different times of the day. So this powerful change in tariff structure here in Brazil, we believe that could encourage the consumption when the energy is cheaper and could leverage demand response, electric mobility, storage, and also distributed generation. This time of use tariff is essential to give also the right economic signals for the part of energy, the product energy to all consumers. Currently, the tariff for small consumers in Brazil is single part. What we call here in Brazil is a monomial tariff. So the big first step towards this modernization in tariffs would be at least reach a 2-part tariffs, what we call here in Brazil binomial tariff. So we still need advancements in this area. The third area would be the market liberalization. The current limit for being a free consumer in Brazil is 1.5 megawatt, but this limit is being reduced in the next years. So January 2022 is 1 megawatt, and January 2023 will be reduced for 500 kilowatts. And also there are some studies being developed by the Ministry of Mines and Energy here in Brazil, analyzing how to turn this liberalization even wider, reaching even maybe, who knows, residential consumers. And the biggest dilemma here in Brazil is that the current Brazilian model for guaranteeing the supply adequacy is driven by centralized auctions. So we'll need some adjustments in this model before we could open the entire consumer market. Number 4, and could be probably to extend the demand response program that we have here in Brazil. Currently, only large consumers can do demand response. We really believe that demand response is an important tool for energy management and also allows a smarter system expansion, so we could take a benefit from generation and also transmission expansion from these demand response programs extended. But, well, I think that is the four, but there is something else that I think is very important, because when we talk about a smart grid, we talk about smart and grid. So grid is for electricity and smart is for data. And the major element for this smart part of smart grid is, of course, the digital communications technology. And this, in this sense, here in Brazil, we have a big room for development regarding both hardware and also software. So when you say hardware is smart meters and sensors, and software is to receive a real-time treatment for this big information that we have regarding consumption. So we really see a big room for developments in this area. Well, probably when the sensors and IoT and connectivity as 5G are cheaper, probably we'll have this benefit here in Brazil, but still we are in initial phases. Thank you.
Thanks, Fabiola, and thanks for sharing one issue that I was planning to address probably at the end. The increasing trend to give more power to the consumers, giving them access or more access, or consumers with lower size, more access to the unregulated markets, because there is also a trend that, for example, in Peru, probably we are a bit ahead of some countries, because those limits have been decreased continuously in Peru. I don't know if Jaime could add something on that on his part. Jaime?
Okay, thank you, Gonzalo. Okay, we are going to speak about the advances in certain technologies and in Peru, no? For example, in our regulation, we have begun a replacement plan for intelligent measurement systems, considering an horizon implementation of up to 8 years, no, for this equipment. In compliance with this provision, most of the utilities has installed around 80,000 smart metering systems as a pilot plan, representing approximately 1% of the total regulated users. Aspects for improvement and details have been identified in the current regulatory framework that establishes the deployment of smart measurement systems in the following aspects. Need to specify technical standards, no? Identification and quantification of benefits towards the benefited users, allocation of smart meter costs, no? Impact of implementation costs due to the massive deployment of this equipment causes a significant rate impact on regulated end user rates, no? And then this is the state in the regulation for a smart metering system, no? And by the other side, in mobility regulations, the Ministry of Energy and Mines, no, has issued a regulation referred to infrastructure for charging and supplying electric power for e-mobility. This document establishes the commercial regime for the battery charging service as an additional service in establishments for the sale of fuels, no, to the public, service stations and gas centers. In addition, it establishes charging infrastructure in private access spaces for personal consumptions. Additional regulation will establish the necessary requirements for the correct design and construction of e-mobility charging infrastructure. A draft regulation issued this year proposed to modify the tariff and conditions to the end user in order to incorporate a new tariff option that includes the measurement of two active energies, one in peak hours and the other in off-peak hours. This is a previous step for the creation of a third hour block and its corresponding rate option in order to promote the e-mobility. However, for this purpose, it's necessary to make adjustments at the generation level to enable the transfer of costs corresponding to each block. In distributed generation regulations, also a draft regulation for this distributed generation was issued in 2018 with the objective of regulating distributed generation, as well as the requirements for its incorporation, operation, and commercial regime. Its scope covers micro generation, medium and low voltage from 0 to 200 kilowatts, and distributed medium generation from 200 kilowatts to 10 megawatts, as well as regulation for access to electricity distribution networks. We are waiting for the final regulation, taking into account the comments to this project. I wanted to mention, besides, three important studies and projects on smart grids recently carried out in Peru. The first one, proposal for regulatory framework for the development of smart grids and distributed generation in Peru. It was in 2018. The objective of this study was to determine a regulatory framework to develop and regulate smart grids and distributed generation in Peru, as well as to obtain the roadmap to promote or evaluate its implementation. It was with the support of BID and Canadian funds. The other is the project Electrical Distribution 4.0. It was in this year, 2021. This is a cooperation project between the German Development Corporation, GIZ, the Ministry of Energy and Mines, and Osinermin. Its objective is to improve the regulatory, institutional, and technical conditions for the integration of renewable energies and the increase of energy efficiency in distribution systems, disseminating besides the knowledge generated to the different actors in the electricity sector. And finally, the reform towards the modernization of the Peruvian electricity sector. Currently, we are working in the elaboration of a white book for this reform. In that way, a broad study conducted for Ministry of Energy and Mines through the Electricity Sector Reform Commission has identified 4 pillars. One of these pillars concerns to the innovation and distribution and retail marketing, which scopes the deployment for a smart measurement system, considering the situation, characteristics, and conditions of our country. This is all in this block. Thank you.
Thanks, Jaime, to keep track of time. While I was listening to all the speakers, I was remembering when was the last time I was at my office, because since COVID started, I guess I just returned probably for briefly 2 or 3 days since March 15. So I was wondering, for example, right now during the panel, some of us had problems of reliability of our broadband, right? But obviously, IT broadband has gotten a lot of pressure in order to improve quality of service due to COVID and due to home office, of course. I was wondering, for example, what does it happen something similar to the distribution networks? Because, I mean, locational consumption has changed, right? Malls are not, the usual high consumption levels that used to be 2 years ago. Obviously, everybody, I guess, is thinking that, somewhere down the line, we will go back to a sort of new normal. But for example, I think home office is here to stay, right? And the pattern, the physical pattern of consumption within the electricity distribution network probably has changed. And I don't know if there could be an issue, let's say some stranded assets on the distribution network, because the distribution companies forecast a pattern of demand that could be different from reality even after post-COVID. But also the pressure on the IT network probably has had a positive effect on the issue that we're discussing right now, because IT obviously has improved and has improved a lot, right? I guess everybody of us, always complain that, okay, you have to turn on your video because you're cutting off, right? So, but I guess somehow we have managed to do that. Any thoughts on this, Jose? I guess you're
I was trying to get hold of my microphone. You have all the right questions, Gonzalo. So we're surrounded of uncertainty right now. The market is dynamic, demand is changing, supply, climate. But I think the good news is that we have all these technologies at our service. So I guess the way to think about it is that we need to take advantage of all the smart grid solutions to be able to deal with that changing landscape, that requirement, that dynamic of the market, which is increasing. And this is the right direction, I guess. This is the future. We need to move along the programs that are going to show more benefit for the customers and keeping an eye on the cost every time, rate impacts, and doing it in an orderly way, right? Step by step, starting from where we get more value and then we develop from there. But I guess maybe that's the right way to think about it. We need to use these technologies as a tool to manage the uncertainty or the requirements of our customers of the grid and to produce the best value for them. And that at the end, that's it. It's not easy to do, but that's what we have to do.
Thank you. Fabiola, any thoughts?
Well, I think that it's a matter of appropriate price signals. I really believe in the power of economic signals, especially when it comes to do this parallel between IT band and in the case of the right signals to the electricity grid. I really believe that if I should choose only one fundamental to have smart grids and evolution in this field here in Brazil, would be to turn the tariffs more transparent. They should reflect the real use of the system. And when I say use, is energy and also the network, the grid. And this would really be very powerful to encourage demand response, storage, and other DERs. Well, also the hardware technologies, so probably smart metering, communication infrastructure, and also the development of low latency 5G. This would be very powerful to have this evolution in grid. And software, data intelligence, because we have a lot of information that needs to be converted into intelligence. So there is a big room to develop methods, models for forecasting demand, weather, prices, intermittent generation that we have a lot here in Brazil. So I really believe that this would be probably a room. Sometimes crises are good. We currently are facing a crisis in Brazil, an energy crisis, and I think there is always a good side on crisis, and probably we could take benefit also here in Brazil this time.
Great. Jaime?
Yes, in Peru, we have a different situation. No? We are beginning, and we have we are not prepared to do the change we want. No, why? Because we need regulations. No, in this sense, the regulations have to be deployed by the government, and then the investors in distribution, in generation, are waiting for price signals, regulation signals. No? In that sense, it's difficult to eviscerate the future in this smart grid development. No? But I know the people must know better the technology that is advancing in the world in this issue, and for many technicals and many people in Peru, we are working for the deployment of smart grids, no? And then this effort must be impulsed by the government. And now we have a new government. No? In that sense, it's difficult to predict the support for this kind of signals. No? Then we have to do the effort to work together and make first to understand the different actors, government, players, investors, and users, the need to deploy this kind of smart grids because they benefit all of us. No? Thank you.
Thank you. And probably just a final question for me before going on final remarks. You just mentioned, Jaime, that in Peru we just have a new government. Colombia will get a new government next year. Brazil is not so far down the road, right? And obviously that issue introduces political uncertainty and sometimes makes difficult how to increase the predictability of policies on the energy sector, right? Where investments are usually taken over longer periods of time. They take a really good long time also to the life cycle of the assets, right? And contracts, and we have not only financing contracts, we have PPAs. So there's always that long terms involved. And during the last, I would say 5 years, what we have seen in Latin America is we have been getting the benefit of lower financing costs, right? Interest rates have been really low. weighted cost of capital has been low as well. International companies were able to finance renewables and get really very good prices with financings. So in this issue that we are going to need to require new capex for the smart grid problems, as Jose was saying, the consumer always has to pay. What could happen with a very difficult issue on the power markets, which is a regulated rate of return. And probably in the last 5 years, there was a trend on decreasing rate of return. And probably nowadays we're going on the other direction, right? Jose, you have some comments on that?
Sure. Well, that's always an issue. We strive for keeping the stability of our rules, the regulation, the market regulations, market rules, but let's say the environment is important, the acceptance of the programs. So it plays a role, and you're right. We've seen a less required rate of return last years, especially after the pandemics. But that doesn't mean that it's easy to reduce rate of return of companies. So there's always a tension there, the resetting process when you have to justify, and because there's always an expectation that may change in the future. So how you open the door that as soon as the rates start to grow up, you are going to be expected to go and increase the rate of return. So stability is very important. Stability is important. So there's always a compromise to getting a stable, predictable investment return, but adjusting to the structural market and international condition, financial condition. So that's the job of regulators. It's not an easy job. There's a tension in there, but that's the way it is.
Thank you, it's not an easy. There is no easy answer to that. It's always
I see, and I'm going to be sorry. I have to disconnect right now. Have a previous commitment, but I thank you all. I wish you a happy rest of the day.
Thanks, Jose, and we're really happy to have you on board today. And we know that you have previous commitments. Fabiola?
Thank you, Gonzalo. Well, I fully agree with Jose's words. Here in Brazil, we have the distribution concession contracts. They are, of course, they have been assigned years ago, and they normally have 30 years of duration. But each 5 years, we have what we call the review. So the review is very important because we try in this review because we know that change the concession contract is very dangerous. So it's something that you should avoid to change the concession contract. But the reviews are they are room for adjustment. So this kind of adjustments to bring more modernity to the distribution companies could be used in this review. So I think that besides that, I really believe in the power of smart regulation. And one excellent example of this is the use of regulatory sandboxes to encourage new business models, new agents. So maybe sooner here in Brazil, we'll have retail traders, aggregators, and virtual power plants, and this kind of a new type of agents in the market. So I really believe that we should use this, I would say, the smart regulation, these opportunities to adjust without creating tensions, because we should avoid this kind of tension to keep the investors safe.
Thanks, Fabiola. Jaime?
Yes, in our case, we have had a large time regulation, no, for 20 years or more, no, in distribution systems, and now we have changed this regulation for the last review of the tariff for the distribution sector. The change has not been a large change, no, but the intention is to improve, no, the benefits to the end user in order to give for this concept, for this distributor the service with more promotion of technology advance. No, how we promote in the tariff, no, technological innovation, no, first, and with that kind of objective, we try to get these new technologies in this sector. And maybe this is going to give to these companies more rate of return, no? But how? Lowering the cost, no? That is the objective. And now we are studying, well, that is Peru, no? We are studying to do more change maybe in the future, because we are now working a reform in the market in all the segments, no? Generation, transmission, and distribution, no? Because we are preparing for the energy transition, and we have many challenges in this work, no? In that way, the regulation in general terms must be stable in the sense of not promote the get out of these companies, because we are changing with no sense, no? The change must have the objective and the signals and the necessary signals to promote the development of this service in the future with more competition, because distribution is not necessarily a monopoly segment, because in other countries we have many other agents working in the trading segment, no? Then, I don't know, we are working always in this review, as Fabiola and Jose have said, in the same sense, no? Thank you.
Thanks, Jaime, and thanks Fabiola, and obviously to Jose for sharing your experience and your views on a topic which is not easy, of course. Has not been as involved on the details of the regulation like Jose or Jaime or Fabiola from the private sector, but obviously energy areas are quite difficult. I don't know if any one of you will like to add some final remarks before closing. Maybe whoever wants, Fabiola or Jaime.
Well, Gonzalo, only say that, well, Brazil is, of course, in the initial steps. We are in baby steps in this smart grid future. So I could say that we are in the right direction of this modernization. But I really feel that the country still needs to speed up towards this future. So probably we'll see in the next years a lot of advancements in regulation in order to reach this future. And just say that I'm very glad to participate. Thank you again for inviting me for this conference. It was a wonderful experience. And well, I'm looking forward to the next opportunity. Thank you very much.
Thanks to you, Fabiola. And Jaime, your final remarks?
Yes, finally, in my opinion, the smart grids are a great support to the countries, no? In their first efforts to decentralization, decarbonization, and digitization, no? Processes. Our population must have a better knowledge about the benefits that renewable energies offer and how they help us to live better. The installation of smart grids generate greater ability of information and the establishment of a more dynamic rate system for end users. However, the implementation of smart grids still implies high investments. No? In that sense, a specific regulation and special mechanisms can help us to a major development of these technologies in the demand side. As I said, the commitment of the government is important in order to propose the strategy, establish a roadmap, and issue the necessary regulations that allow us to make the energy transition according to our needs, taking into account that our region is rich at the same time vulnerable in environmental terms. Thank you again for the invitation. It was a pleasure to be with you in this distinguished event.
Thanks, Jaime. And just to give some final remarks, I was trying to get a sense of a summary of some of the topics that all our panel members have discussed. And I guess one of the important issues is try to precise what are the key components of smart grids, because there are lots of key parts. Which component is going to be prioritized, because given the fact that the consumer has to pay for all of it at the end, there are some conflicting views or trade-offs on ability to pay, on the level of cost recovery on rates, and of course, all of that will depend on the regulatory framework of each country. Some of the countries, like Colombia, have more advanced trading mechanism, like Fabiola was saying, the separation between the wires and the energy. That, for example, we do not have that in Peru, right? But probably we'll have to go in that direction as well. So unbundling probably is very important, and hopefully we will end up with smart regulation. It's difficult to do smart regulation. It's hard. There's always trial and error, and I guess we hope that the good results are more common than some bad results, because that also could happen. I'm an economist by education, so I really am a true believer on price signals and incentives. Just to end up, I would like to thank you, Fabiola, Jaime, and Jose, for sharing with us, and also thanks to the organizers and you, the participants, to share some time of the day with us. Thanks, and thank you all. Take care. Bye.